Welcome to the Saturday Cup of Joe, week 254 from Detroit. I got my cup of Joe here. This is my What's Next mug. If you watch The West Wing or if you're a fan of The West Wing, President Bartlett always says, "What's next?" Meredith got me my What's Next mug. What's next is a great phrase because I use it a lot in innovation. I use it on my LinkedIn to try to describe this perpetual motion. It's also a little better than, the typical questions that in our workplace or on our teams, right? It's like, what's up? How's it going? And that's such a hard question to answer because you never know what the other person's actually asking. Like, do they really want to know or not? So when I first joined the company I'm at now, the question was, I used to say, nothing or not much, I guess the way everybody says that. But um, often when asked that, if the right senior leader is nearby, or especially on the sales team, somebody will respond with, why not? So the conversation goes, what's up? Nothing. Not much. Why not? Why isn't there something up? Why isn't there more going on? So kind of defaulted. My go-to now is everything and nothing because it seems like it's all happening. There's motion everywhere. There's activity everywhere. Everyone's running in 1,000 directions, but what's actually happening? And I say nothing because it's like, do you really want to know? Most of the time, I don't think the question is really what's up. The question is just hello and move on, right? Hello, and I've done my check the box and move on. So, to the degree it's not, to the degree someone's really asking you how's it going or what's up, put them on the spot. Always answer it directly. What's up with me this week is thinking a lot about ideas that could have been, should have been. And one of the things I'm always challenged with is whether I'm the guy who just wants to talk about the idea, throw it out there because talking about it's enough, or whether there's more there and it's an idea that's going to stick around or hold on, it's a problem I'm going to have to solve. And so throughout the Cup of Joe, there's been a lot of problems where it's just been good enough to talk about them. Putting them out there was enough. I had one that I really, really liked and was a real idea. Could be a business to this day. But I found that the more I talked about it and threw it out there, which was converting shopping malls, suburban shopping malls, into residential housing, making the mall itself a community with walking or centralized services in the middle, like a coffee shop or a dog park or some astroturf, some picnic tables or something, and using all of the different what used to be retail spots as housing complexes or housing units. And so you could imagine that like what used to be the Macy's or the J.C. Penney wing of the mall, could either be a theme, so those are the quiet hours after 9, or where you know, one could be for families or something and create little communities. Plenty of parking, typically decent locations right off the highway or right near areas that could be for commuters. I love that idea, still do. But the massive amount of retrofitting and the investment, it's a, multi-billion dollar investment. It's a giant company. So it felt like talking about it, thinking about it was fun enough. Raising the capital didn't feel like the next thing. So sometimes it's enough just to talk about it. Sometimes you have to like take the next step. And I think when I think of entrepreneurs I've met or founders I've met, many of them want to work on that one thing, either because it was a problem they wanted solved and it didn't exist in the world, so they have to solve it, or it was tough enough that it satisfies that insatiable energy of an entrepreneur for years. One of the things that jumped out at a meeting I was in this week, I was thinking about, we are talking as we do, big ideas, how to change the world, and and I realized that I have these walking around ideas. That's what I call them. Because in college, when I used to write papers, I was a political science major, so I used to write a lot of papers, and my style was to get thoughts that I was going to use, quotes I was going to use, or research that I was going to use, and put it on a note card, put the note cards in my pocket. And then as I walked around everywhere for a week or two, I would kind of look at the note cards and reorder them such that when I sat down to write the paper, I could typically write it all in one night. So where it seemed weird to my roommates and friends that I could write a 10 or 12 or 13-page paper in one night, the reality was I'd been walking around with the idea, for 2 weeks. So when I have some ideas like this, I tend to think of them as walking around ideas. And the one that came out in a meeting this week, kind of unexpectedly, we were talking about some other things about social impact and affordable housing. And, I've been thinking a lot about modular housing, which I'll talk about in a second. But what came out in the meeting was, why aren't we manufacturing houses, modular housing, in Amazon style warehouses all over the country? Why don't we have 12 to 15 Amazon style warehouses in major metros and creating modular housing that you can piece together? And perhaps it's just early, meaning the modular manufacturing facilities had to catch up. But reality is that creates jobs. Right now, creating jobs at 12 to 15 locations is huge. Modular housing is faster, more energy efficient. It's increasingly stylish. So the process allows potential homeowners to select square footage by choosing the number of units you want to put together. The homes are easier to maintain, more cost effective to maintain because things are standardized. So if somebody comes out to fix them and they're built to a standard, they can be fixed much in the same way. You can order parts similar to the way you'd order parts for an auto, right? For your auto parts store, you just order the part because it's standardized across the country. So if we could increase housing supply, we could create jobs, we could lower the cost of housing overall, both for the individual homeowner, because the units are more efficient, but also for the community, because you're inserting more housing. And I think what the research shows that any flood of housing supply is good for the full range of housing costs. So you don't have to flood the market with affordable rental housing or low income or very low income rental housing. That certainly helps. But even mid-market supply eases the burden in both directions on competitive bids for home ownership or allowing rental units to open up. And the more rental units open up, like people moving up or down the housing chain, lowers rent costs overall, even very low housing rental costs. So injecting mid-market housing in urban infill could actually alleviate very low income and low income rental costs. So my, some of the risks, of course, you got any ideas got risks to it. There's, acquiring the land and the cost of land, which is why I keep thinking of, mid-market or Midwest urban infill where land might still be, attainable. But there's labor costs, there's union implications potentially, there's material costs. Certainly the material costs are lower than subdivisions or the timber required in a traditional single family home build or community. But one of my favorite modular companies right now, if you're looking into this to see how stylish it can be, is Connect Homes. Connect Homes, we've been talking for a while, and it's great product, impressive team, really big vision. One of the incredible case studies I can't get out of my head is, the cost of housing on the West Coast, California, Washington, Oregon is high, and in LA, you can actually buy a 1950s bungalow, tear it down. Let's say you buy the house for $900,000 or $1 million. You tear it down another 50 or 80 grand. You put a Connect Home modular, 2,800 square foot or 2,500 square foot unit there, house there, and that's another 900, let's say $1,000. So you're all in at 1.8 million, let's say 1.88 million in LA. That house, the brand new Connect Home, will appraise for 2.3, 2.4. You're leading day one with $700,000 of equity. So that works with the economics of the West Coast. We have to figure out, what this looks like nationwide. But I got really, that was one of those ideas this week that just I've been walking around with it, still thinking about it. It still sticks with me. And housing supply is such an issue right now. I mean, we're talking about a housing market that you call it a seller's market. It is whatever the next level up. Somebody this week kind of called it like they described it in a Instagram meme as sort of it's a game of musical chairs where you know the chairs and the floor are on fire, or the floor is on fire and the chairs are the only safe spot. I mean, people are rushing around to try to make offers and to try to win houses in many markets, and so we know supply is going to be a constraint, really driving up home values over the next year or two as interest rates increase slightly it'll be really interesting seeing what happens. And who's affording houses and where are they affording them is a huge question. I think about because I talk about it on here all the time. So more we can do for supply really is been interesting to me. The other thing that came up it was a little couple of weeks ago this past, but I've been kind of telling different people about this story and it seems to resonate, which is my swimming pools of dice story. It's not my line, so don't credit me, but in innovation in product development, this idea of the Cinefin framework, which I'll put a link to, but this idea that there are four categories of work. There's simple, straightforward, A to B, cause and effect. There's complicated, there's complex, and then there's chaotic. You never want to lead in chaotic. You never want to have your project or your development be chaotic. So let's focus on complicated and complex. Complex is, well, let's start with complicated. Complicated would be something that takes a lot of measurements, a lot of calculations, but ultimately the rules are clear and you can figure it out with enough people working on it. So an example would be going to the moon. Going to the moon is complicated, but the rules of physics and engineering dictate that enough people working hard enough, you can actually do the measurements. Obviously, we've done it and figured it out. Where complex, the difference is you're actually working in an environment where the rules are changing as you're proceeding. So an example might be, each step you take walking across a swamp, not knowing what the foundation or the ground is going to feel like in the next step. Another example you think of is just warfare, general warfare, right? Global warfare, where the actual rules of engagement, the actual landscape, and the scenario in which you have to make a decision is constantly changing. And so in those complex cases, which I think a lot, we think a lot about the leaders who can lead through complexity. One thing that is in our industry that's complicated, sort of back out for a second, is mortgage underwriting. And this brings me back to swimming pools of dice that I said, which is, mortgage underwriting is highly personal. The calculations are the same, but vary to different person to person scenarios. So whatever your income and employment and equity position is, whatever your debt versus your employment versus your income. And there's so many different scenarios. One of the thought leaders in our industry had compared this in a meeting to rolling a six-sided die. You roll one, there's six outcomes, 1 to 6. You roll two, there's 36 outcomes. You roll 20, you could hold 20 in two hands and roll them. You have 4 quadrillion outcomes. And so when you think of one mortgage underwriter, one company underwriting hundreds, thousands of mortgages a year, you've got 4 quadrillion different outcomes. When you think of mortgage investors, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, whomever's buying, you know, credit risk at a global scale, you have swimming pools of dice, right? Quadrillion upon quadrillion outcomes. And I think one of the reasons so few entities have cracked the code or wanted to jump in as a mortgage investor or as a challenger to some of these institutions has really been the amount of variations, the complexity that is born out of the complicated nature of mortgage underwriting. So I would not put mortgage underwriting in the complex category. The rules of engagement are not changing. And even in the business world, of real estate mortgage, the rules of engagement, this sort of like the ground shifting underneath you, hasn't really been changing all that much. It's actually really a complicated problem. The complexity, I think, comes more in the innovation when you start to think about buying and selling homes differently, when you start to think of changing the way you engage with assets. And a lot of the things swirling around right now in the market, digital currency, cryptocurrency, non-fungible tokens, uh, are offering us the opportunity to understand the real estate platform, the buy sell asset classes differently and kind of blur the lines. So I've been thinking about that, asking those interesting questions. And I think, we saw one real estate platform, OfferPad, more traditional buy sell cash movement, not around some of these other innovations I'm talking about, announce a SPAC. Somebody is raising a SPAC to take to target OfferPad and take them public. But I think what it signals is that the collision course that we've been describing, or that I've been describing, of real estate, mortgage, and tech over the next couple of years is just starting to collide. And so it'll be very interesting to see how buy-sell platforms and digital brokerages and hybrid real estate mortgage brokerage concepts change in the market. So one of the things that's been reoccurring is just asking these questions, just asking complexity versus complicated type questions, asking about whether something is something I want to talk about or something I actually want to do. And the phrase that came up in response this week, somebody told me, well, you got to think big, start small, and scale fast. So I throw that out there to you, those of you running companies, running teams, running big acquisitions. Think big, start small, scale fast. The trouble is, what is the definition of start small? I think we all can agree on thinking big. I think scaling makes sense. It's hard to do, but it makes sense. The start small part's where I get hung up. If you're launching a company, what does start small mean? Given the risk and the sacrifice and the urgency, is that one market? Is it one consumer product? That's one that's sticking with me. Again, I'll have to walk around with it and think about it, but think big, start small, scale fast. What does start small mean? And then the other thing was just a couple of questions that popped up. I'll leave you with them in a closing thought, which is how to start interesting conversations. And I've been thinking about these two questions. I guess I have to answer the questions too, because that's only fair. But the two questions that make for interesting conversation? What do you believe that most people do not? And what do most people believe that you do not? So trying to get at somebody's outlier ideas. And I was trying to think of how to answer this question because that's only fair. And so the first question we'll start with is, what do most people believe that I do not? And I think I'm settling on patience is rewarded. I, w- I don't know that I would challenge patience as a virtue. I think it probably is. What I would challenge though is that patience, particularly around playing by the rules and waiting for your turn, especially in your career, is something I think a lot of people think about. And I think a lot of people abide by it. It's not a bad thing. It has positive outcomes, it lowers risks, and there is upside, but that upside is not reward. The upside's moderate. So it's moderate upside, it's a hedge. And generally, it's not a popular opinion to push. Ambition, for instance, is often seen as a threat, not as much among privileged white men historically, but among everyone else. They get told that you have to be more patient and that ambition is seen as a bad sign. I think generally people are suspicious, assigning sort of traits like entitlement and arrogance to ambition. I kind of think a healthy tension is good. I kind of think there's a positive peer pressure, there's an upward tension that keeps everyone on their toes if you're doing it the right way. And stifling that can sort of lead to mediocrity, can lead to that moderation. So a friend once told me that the mindset I'm talking about is grateful yet unsatisfied. And I think the grateful part is key and really important and true, at least for me. But I want to also capture that energy, that sort of kinetic tension that's always probing and pushing, because I think that's a really key piece of, you know, challenging patience. I think the other thing is, or the other question, I mean, what do I believe that most people do not, is probably comes back to communal living. Communal living seems to be the thing that comes up with Saturday Cup of Joe or my friends, where I just don't think it's theoretical, whether it's about the asset, the home, or whether it's about community. I think we deeply desire, maybe not consciously, but we deeply desire the communal commune village. And I think it's becoming increasing in popularity as we see like sharing, peer funding or crowdsourcing, which is networking. I think social media is really an outcropping of the psychology of people rather than the other way around. And so there's a greater sense of community and home that can get divided up, can get shared, can get brought together to be bigger and stronger. I think we understand insurance. Insurance is spreading risk across a crowd, across a population. I think we're starting to understand the power of both ideas and money the other way, brought together and used together for a common purpose. So I don't know if it comes all the way out to truly physically living in the same space, or it's this groups of people pooling their money across populations to do more with their assets, including their homes. I think it's huge. And I think most people still think of, I want to own my own home. I want it to be my land, and I will take 100% of the upside at the end of 30 years or at the end of the day. But I don't buy that. And I think we're looking to unlock some of those special characteristics of the community and the power of sharing, networking, coming together. But that's me. We'll see. Hopefully, this is a valuable Saturday Cup of Joe. Hopefully, it makes you think, ask some questions. That's what I'm here for. Have a great week. Talk to you next time.